Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell. Zach Bartles joining me. Zach, what's going on, man?
I just found the best playlist ever on Pandora.
Really? I'm intrigued.
All my jams that make me so happy are always 90s. And previously, I had been just very pleased with my Two Princes playlist. Do you remember that song?
Yes.
Which is not that great of a song, but somehow that I realized that all my favorite playlists had that song in common. So I started with that one, and it was just marvelous. But then, as is wont to happen, it slowly got away from me, and eventually it was like I'd turn it on, and it was just that like fat Hawaiian guy playing "What a Wonderful World" over and over again, that happens to every single playlist, and which I love that song. It's just that's not all of my it's not any of the playlist's ethos.
Right.
So I started with Gin Blossoms this time. It's marvelous, man.
Nice.
My mood has never been better. I turned that thing on. I was listening to some two Red Hot Chili Pepper songs I never would have remembered actually existed. And I felt like I had been drinking, just mainlining coffee, and then won a trophy.
That is fantastic. Isn't Pandora great for stuff like that? It takes you down places you never knew you missed.
Pay the $5 for the monthly thing. This isn't like a sponsor. This is just it's a life hack. Everything's a life hack now, right?
That's right.
I found that I got so angry at the commercials that the $4.99 for our whole household to have Pandora was worth it. We don't have cable or anything, so I feel okay paying for that.
Right. Nice. Oh man. Well, we got to throw a shout out to Missional Wear, and I'm conflicted about this because
they won you to the dark side, Nathan. What happened this week? That's what I want to know.
I know this was something you brought up to me, Zach. Was that you were looking on Missional Wear's website and you were like, "Dude, where's our collab section on Missional Wear? Like the These Go to 11 collab section is just gone."
It erased from existence.
Yeah. And as soon as you said it, I went on there and I was tooling around a bit, and so I went to the search button and typed in These Go to 11, and you can still actually search for our stuff, but
you can just find it in the Happy Rant page.
They're just
going to go to Louisville, and you can get it there.
That's right. So it is still there, and so I still do want to give the shout out to Mission Wear. Plus, they really did a great job with, throwing together everything for the contest. Don't forget, today is the last day to send me your name and address via email. These go to 11, all spelled out. The number 15 at gmail.com. These go to 11, the number 15 at gmail.com. And you will have some cool stuff coming your way to everyone else. That will be sent out to you within the next week or so here, as soon as I get all that stuff compiled and sent. So, you can expect that coming up. But don't forget to check out Mission Wear, because even though, they kind of slacked off a little bit this week with us, they still do some dope stuff, and they were still really cool providing all the beer mugs and decals for the contest. So shout out to Mission Wear.
Maybe that was the trade-off. They were like, listen, if we're going to do all this for you, there has to be some kind of a cost involved. You lose your collab status for 30 days.
Hey, you know what? If they want to do that for 30 days, and I'm cool with that.
I'm not, man. The former Pubcast is going to be up there. We need to be up there. That's all I'm saying.
I'm gonna shoot a email out to Jeff, because I think I noticed that happen with a couple of the other collabs before when I was on there. Is they kind of disappeared and it was gone for like a week or two, and then they were back up. So I don't know if they're kind of trying to reimage the page or something like that. But
she keeps saying Russia. I don't. Maybe it was.
Oh man, that's great, dude. So speaking of spies, and actually I don't know how we're going to work spies into this, but
speaking of things,
speaking of
that we're
stuff
about with our words.
So actually this topic is something that I was interested in talking about for a little while now, and never really got around to it with Greg or Steve. I think we've hit on it before, but we never really dedicated a full podcast to it. I guess before we get into that,
Steve, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I guess before we get into it, I should say, a lot of you noticed that we were going to have Frank Turk on this week. We did send out that tweet and reposted it on Facebook. So I think we should acknowledge that in some form. But
yeah, he had a death in the family and had to go to a viewing or a funeral or something. So yeah. And then I said, how about next week? He's like, I'll be in Spain. I'm like, you're going to be, he says it like it's like he's going to be at, I'm going to be at a friend's house. No, I'm going to be in Spain all week.
I'm going to Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, right. Globe-trotting Turkish.
That's right.
Dude, so yeah, pray for Turk and his family. I think he's an elder at his church. And maybe it wasn't a death in the family, but it was definitely close to him. I think it wasn't his family. But I think he's no, it was somebody in the church, but he's involved now in ministry there. So
someone, yeah.
I've been really excited to get to know Turk and see how watch his arc, and I'm excited to talk about it at some point with him.
Yeah, yeah, and so we will be definitely doing that podcast. We're just gonna, obviously let him, grieve and mourn and get back from Spain, and then we'll.
That's part of the grieving process.
That's
getting
right.
Back from Spain, actually.
That's right. So.
Step.
It's the unheard of step. That's why people never really truly get over their grief. They never go to Spain.
Oh man, we're horrible people.
We are.
You and I.
We are, but I'm good with that.
Right, yeah. I'm happy with how horrible I am. If I weren't a wretch, I wouldn't appreciate God's grace. So.
Oh man. Oh dude. Okay. So another little side note. We will get into our topic. I promise. This past Sunday, Greg's been on sabbatical, so we've been having people coming in and out and preaching. So the preacher this Sunday decided that he wasn't going to do like an exegetical sermon. What he decided to do instead was read through Romans chapter 1 through chapter 8. Dude, can I say that was just a really cool sermon to be a part of? Just reading that, he had actually memorized it, and so he just recited it word for word, Romans chapter 1 through chapter 8. And it was really cool to, feel the weight and the impact of a message like that. Just, strictly coming from the book of Romans, coming from God's word, no, exposition to it. He had a couple little slides that he would click through to kind of summarize the main points of the sections he was at. But other than that, and I mean, it was amazing. Blew my mind away.
3 questions.
Yeah.
1, did he pass it off as his own work, or did he acknowledge that it wasn't his?
Oh, no.
Right off the bat.
Oh, yeah. No. He totally acknowledged that he got this idea from someone else.
Oh, okay. So he wasn't like, this is something I wrote and I've been working on. He was like, this is from the Bible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then he started going.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Secondly, when he was doing this, did he have kind of a merch tie-in with the Romans poster from Missional Wear? And if not, why not?
He did not, and I think it was because he's actually, I don't know if he's fully familiar with Missional Wear. So yeah,
he's a heathen.
He is. I should have stayed after and converted him, but full disclosure, it was raining and I was itching to get home. So,
all right. 3rd question: did you pay him? Did the church pay him in that he didn't really preach?
Oh,
Dude, I one time got up and recited the entirety of "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God."
Oh, nice.
And not like high pitched, like
Jonathan Edwards, yeah,
read it monotone. I did it passionately, and then I kind of talked a little about it.
Yep.
And it was very well received.
Nice.
And then I brought up maybe I'd make this like a yearly thing, like maybe the week after Easter when I'm bushed, and everyone was like, "No, don't ever do that again." We liked it once.
It was good. You did it. Moving on. Oh man. So, okay, getting into our topic. Actually, this is a great transition. So speaking of pastors, dude, let me ask you, in today's climate, we are dealing with I think a really dynamic shift in the way people are looking for pastoring, shepherding, mentoring, whatever you want to call it. And we have a lot more people like John Piper, Matt Chandler, Kevin DeYoung, who put out not just their private little blogs that they're like, oh, this is kind of free and, people can read these things, but like they almost put out these pastoral blogs where they expect and anticipate that people aren't necessarily getting a regular. I mean, maybe this isn't fair. I don't know quite the motivation, but my suspicion is part of the reason why they're doing this is that there are people out there who aren't getting a steady diet of, solid theological teaching. They're not able, maybe for one reason or another, to go to their pastors and talk to them about issues. And so they put these things out. You have Ask Pastor John, and all the different ones that are out there. And so have you seen this trend in the church as well? And I want to ask you from a pastoral standpoint, do you think this is good, bad? Could you care less about it? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, obviously I've seen it. Yeah. I mean, and I mean, I've bought into it to some degree. And it gets more kind of touchy when you say, okay, a pastor is kind of looking to one of these very prominent pastors for this kind of feeding and direction and stuff. I have many thoughts on it, and I've written somewhat extensively on it on an old blog that I had that's now defunct and marked as private. I probably had a 6 or 7 week series on this, and I was very, very strident back then. I was a little bit residual cage stage, and yet at the same time very aware of the tendency in myself and other people like me to go, it's okay to have that celebrity pastor that stands in for a pastor, a flesh and blood pastor, as long as he's dead. You know what I mean? As long as there's no chance I can ever have a meaningful interaction with him. If it's Spurgeon or if it's Edwards or if it's Whitfield or Ryle or whoever.
Right.
And two things come to mind. One, very recently, I think it was Jared C. Wilson. I'm pretty sure this sounds like him, who tweeted, "You can get a sermon on TV or online, but you can't get church." And it's such a succinct way to say something that I've tried to say so many times with a lot of words. I think it was Rod Rosenblatt on the White Horse Inn one time said, you can definitely do everything you need for church online as long as your laptop has a wine port on it. There really is no way to fill the biblical requirement of being part of a local body via the internet. Now, there are people who can't get to church, and I still think it's a bad excuse if that's the extent of your involvement. Someone's like, I've got rheumatoid arthritis or whatever I've got. Right. I can't get out. I'm a shut-in. I'm elderly and sickly. And I know, there are people at my church, all they get is TV on Sunday morning. And so you know what I try to do? I bring them a CD of our service. Maybe every other week I'll bring that to them. Or if I know a family member of theirs, I'll slip them one each week so they can be part of their church. And I go to their homes and I visit with them and I bring a deacon with me and we have the Lord's Supper together. And they continue to be part of an active, actual, local to them church. And it doesn't have to be this fantasy land thing. Now, most of the people who buy into the celebrity thing, it's not out of necessity. It's out of, well, why would I settle for, Zach if I can go online and listen to R.C. Sproul or whoever the case, and you get into a whole different set of presuppositions and problems when you go that route, because you're now doing an end run around the biblical model and embracing a model that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 is condemned. You're becoming part of a pack that's built on a person instead of part of a local household of faith. and it's not going to feed into any kind of real maturity or sanctification or equipping. It's that stuff can supplement. I don't know, how often do you use do you listen to a sermon by? I mean, Matt Chandler is one of the greatest preachers I've ever heard in my life. How often do you plug into him or somebody else?
Honestly, I don't. Yeah, I don't like. I don't know. I enjoy Greg's teaching and preaching. And there was a period of time where my wife and I were not getting solid biblical teaching. We first moved to Maryland. There was a small church just down the road from where we lived. Basically, all of her family was going there. Where we went to college, there was a church just kind of down at the bottom of the hill from where we went to college. And it was interesting because a lot of the college professors would go to this church. And so the pastor was just very on point with making sure that his sermons were theologically accurate because, there were a whole slew of his colleagues from the religion department who, were going to be there listening to him. And so he was just very on top of, sound biblical teaching. And we got to Maryland and we spent about 5 years out of convenience just going to the church literally a mile down the road from our house. We would go to Sunday school and her uncle taught Sunday school and he did a great job at really, bringing out the Bible and teaching the Bible. But when we got to the service, it was all this Dr. Phil type stuff that you would get. And we just finally at one point were like, we can't do this anymore. Like, yeah, Sunday school is great, but like the main staple of what we were supposed to be engaging with in church is not. And so at that point, Joy was teaching at the same school where Greg was teaching at. And she literally had to hound him to get information about his church because he was very sensitive to not just give that away and kind of recruit people from the school to the church. And we sat down under his teaching. And after that first week, I was like, this is it. Like, I really don't feel a need. We had been looking around at a couple different churches, but I was like, I really don't think we need to go anywhere else. And so I feel like under Greg, I've had a really solid biblical teaching. And so I will grab commentaries. I will do Bible studies with people, but I don't feel the need to go out and listen to, and it's not to say anything negative against Matt Chandler or John Piper or Kevin DeYoung or, anyone else. I haven't felt the need to supplement the teaching at that point because of the Bible studies and different things that, we were doing within the church. I don't know. Does that seem like a reasonable answer, or do you think I should be going out and, downloading all these sermons and listening to people like that?
Well, I think that you're missing a big piece, which is that with Greg Dutcher as your pastor, you have a celebrity pastor. So, you don't need to go out and get other celebrity pastors. But
who else do I need?
I listen to probably anywhere between 3 and 10 sermons a week. Mm-hmm. If I have something on my radar that I want to preach maybe next year, I'd like to hear 5 people preach through it. Mm-hmm. And I have some big names I listen to regularly. I love listening to Alistair Begg any chance I get. Mm-hmm. I listen to R.C. Sproul. They're still doing Renewing Your Mind.
Yep.
Oh man, I love that. But I also have Sinclair Ferguson is pretty big name, but I have 6 or 7 guys on sermon audio. They probably have churches of 110 people.
Yep.
And I'll go, man, these people should be heard by tens of thousands. And I listen to them regularly. There's a guy named, you may hear him if you ever listen to Fighting for the Faith, Chris Roseborough's show. Gervais Nicholas Edward Charmley. He's a friend of mine on Facebook, and whenever he posts, here's my sermon from last week, he's in Stoke-on-Trent in England and probably has 200 people in his church. I go to that. So it's not necessarily the star power that will bring me in.
Right.
But I do really enjoy the fact that the technology today allows me to just have tons of teaching at my fingertips. And it's not like you have to use it, but I always think, why not? I like to redeem the time. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of sermons.
Yep.
And I put my sermons out on iTunes, and I get emails from people in Germany or Korea telling me I appreciated this sermon or that. They found it just by Googling. It's just awesome. And so that's the plus side, I think.
Yeah.
The negative side is when we let it, become an excuse to disengage. There was a piece on Team Pyro, which is also to sort of make Turkish here with us today. That's also how he got quasi-internet famous, is by on Team Pyro with Phil Johnson. But Dan Phillips did a piece like 10 years ago, and it was called Porn and Paper Pastors. And I have referred so many people to it over the years. It basically starts out with saying, here's what is so dangerous, so wrong, and so self-destructive about pornography. You have this thing that God created for you to connect with another person on a spiritual level, on a level that, you're one flesh, you're imaging the mystery of the Christ and church relationship. It's this sacred, beautiful thing. And instead of connecting with a real person, you connect with this image on a screen or in a magazine or whatever the case. And apart from the sinful aspect of this, that it's just damaging your soul and you're grieving the Spirit and you're incurring God's wrath, you're also you're hurting your own ability to connect with people, because that woman who is beautiful in that 1 second and then she's airbrushed and everything about it is so fake but feels so real in the moment. That woman is never grumpy. She's never got her own stuff. You never need to listen to her. There's nothing about a real human relationship in that.
Yeah.
And then he turns the corner and says, this may sound crass, but for a lot of people, that same principle applies to them trying to make, whether it's Chuck Swindoll or John Piper or Charles Spurgeon, their pastor, instead of, because Charles Spurgeon, when you read him, he never has a bad day. He never doesn't have time to listen to you. He never has his own stuff going on. It's never a real relationship.
Right.
And that can seem, just like in the former example, like a plus at the time, but it is actually a huge liability. It's the kind of thing that slowly chips away at our ability to connect with someone and iron sharpen iron and build each other up and encourage each other and spur each other on to good works and discover God's word together the way the church was meant to. Yeah. And it just like, some guy would say, why would I, settle for one woman who's going to get older and have bad days and after she has kids, her body's going to change and all these things when I can just, either churn through a lot of women or I can, look at these images. Yeah, okay, but that's miserable.
Right.
There's nothing good in that. And if we try it, there's this airbrushed quality to that,
Yeah.
And if we try and apply that to the way we learn and connect with pastors, the same thing happens. And I don't think any pastor worth his salt. I know Matt Chandler and John Piper and these other solid guys, John MacArthur, et cetera, would not want people to not have a local pastor because they have this figurehead. Mm-hmm. I just talked a lot, man. Why don't you say some stuff? I apologize. I've gone full Baptist preacher on you.
Nice. No, it's great. I do. I appreciate that perspective, and I know our listeners do as well, because I'm going to get on here and just sound like a bumbling fool. So the fact that you spoke from a place of intelligence is awesome. No, but I think that's, I think you're spot on with all of that stuff, and I mean, let me back up just a second and say, it's not that I don't listen to those things because I think Greg is the end all be all teacher. If that were the case, then I would say I'm seriously, misrepresenting, Greg. I'm seriously misrepresenting myself as well, because Eventually Greg is going to at some point retire down the road. He will no longer be my pastor at some point in time. And so if I'm not willing to look at the community of believers that I'm with and say, this is my family, no matter who's behind the pulpit, then I've missed the mark as well. And I think that's something that's key and fundamental for people to understand, is that, when I joined with Christ Fellowship Church, I'm joining, for lack of better terms, for better or worse. That means that, when things are good, I'm involved and I'm helping. And when things are bad, I'm involved and I'm helping. And I think that's what people are looking for with a lot of these celebrity pastors is, I don't have to, like you said, I don't have to engage. I don't have to connect. I don't have to be involved in the messy bits of the church. But then you never really grow in the church either. When Christ prays for, his disciples, the Garden of Gethsemane, we talked about that a few weeks ago, his prayers in the book of John, they will know my disciples by the love that you have for one another, by the love that they have for one another, by the love that they show one another. And part of that love is the grace that we show one another when we do stupid things to one another. It's the same thing that happens in our families. I can, count several thousand times the stupid things that I've done to my wife over the years. I'm a boneheaded man who is saved by grace, and I can count, equally those times that she has forgiven me for those stupid things. But you learn about that grace, you learn about that compassion in those relationships, and you learn about that in the church as well. You learn that your pastor is not this stained glass perfect person, but that he has flaws and issues, but willing to come to you and, apologize when those issues come up and, work those things out in the grace that God shows us. And that's so important for people to see, because I think a lot of times they don't. They look at the churches and they're like, well, there's so much, backbiting, and there's so much hypocrisy, and there's so much this, and there's so much this. And to be able to say, yeah, you know what, there's all that, but there's also a lot of love and grace that we show one another with all those things, because that's the love and grace that God shows us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other side of that is that it's not only is that missing from the perspective of the man or woman in the pew, mm-hmm. but it's not any favor to those pastors, those preachers, to lift them up on these huge pedestals. When I goof up, mm-hmm. I have to go to a person or a few people, or if it was something kind of public, I got to go to, my church has 142 members or something. Mm-hmm. That's manageable. I say I screwed up. I'm a sinner saved by grace. Will you forgive me? And they say, yep, we'll forgive you. And maybe they also say, and here's how we're going to help you not do that again.
Right.
My elder board ought to be involved and that kind of thing. But when these guys get put on this huge pedestal, what happens is when they fall, it's not like that at all. It's enormous. And I'm not saying it's somehow inevitable that putting a guy on a big pedestal he's going to. But I mean, I don't know. Would Tullian Tchividjian or any would Mark Driscoll have even fallen? He wasn't unfaithful to his wife or anything. Mm-hmm. But what happens is you're told day after day after day after day, you can be a pastor to millions.
Right.
You are a super pastor.
Right.
You're and I start thinking 2 Corinthians and the super apostles.
Right.
No one can endure that. Who can endure that? I couldn't endure that.
Oh yeah.
There's no way I could endure having like fame and like influence in the greater evangelical world without it corrupting and shipwrecking me.
Right.
I could not.
Right.
And so I am thankful that I have a number of sheep that I can take heed to all of them and know them and be there for them. And there have been times when I have heard a sermon by a famous pastor and thought, dang, I can preach on that text better than you. Why are you the one who gets heard by this many people?
Right.
And I am so glad that God doesn't say, oh, you're right, Zach, here you go. But rather says, shut up.
Right.
And take what little, if you're faithful with little, you'll be given more. Just be faithful. Just be faithful. And the more the higher someone's lifted up and the more emphasis is put on that man, the more we're setting him up to be David on the palace roof, to be Nebuchadnezzar looking over Babylon the Great, which I have made, to be Herod, taking the "you're a god, not a man" and going, "Oh, that sounds pretty good."
Right.
It's not fair to these guys. And you have some who can take that and they're just so grounded in Christ that they're not susceptible insofar as pride isn't their besetting sin.
Mm-hmm.
A Spurgeon, for example, or I mean, we could name a lot of preachers who it seems to be the case. Although I would have definitely put Tullian Tchividjian in that list before he fell. There seem to be a lot of people who are all right under that weight. They have people reminding them that they're sinners saved by grace.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to say it's always a bad thing that these preachers should be eschewing the attention and saying, no, don't buy my books. No, don't listen to my sermons. But when that becomes the culture, then altogether we've contributed, each of us a little bit, to a very toxic situation that's bad for the people who are left without a true pastor, and even worse for the people who are left in the position of, they're not pastoring those people.
Right.
There's so much more to being a pastor than preaching and teaching. Yeah. In my peer group, I meet with about 7 other pastors, and we just met this morning, and we're reading through The Reformed Pastor by Richard Baxter. And, so little of that is about what you teach.
Right.
And so much of it is about spending time with your people.
Yeah.
And that whole aspect of ministry just fades away and disappears if, the time I spend, quote unquote, in church is sitting there with and here's the other element, and I'll bounce this back to you, ping pong ball wise. Tell me if you've seen this. Most people, when they start going, well, I'm just going to watch it on TV. They watch heretics. They don't have the discernment to watch the good preachers and teachers. So I've got people going, well, Joyce Meyer said this on Sunday, or that Joel Osteen, or whatever, and I'm going, oh, you need to just get rooted and grounded in the church, and there are many good teachers here who can help you leave that whole industrial complex alone.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% on that. I mean, you look at just the field of what you think of the typical televangelists that are out there, and it's a stereotype for a reason. And it is sad that is what becomes the predominant face of Christianity, and it's sad that that's what Christians latch onto. But at the same time, I mean, it's not surprising either, because you look at the size of the churches that these people pastor, and by far and large, I mean, these are significantly large congregations. And I've always struggled with that to a certain extent, because I don't think there's anything intrinsically or inherently wrong with a larger congregation in a church, and I think there are definitely some teachers out there who have larger churches who are preaching solid biblical doctrine in the pulpits, but I don't necessarily think that's the norm per se either. It's certainly not the norm in the mainstream media, because the people that you're typically hearing about are, the Kenneth Copelands, the Creflo Dollars, the, Joel Osteens, and so there is so many people out there who are getting the publicity, and people are clinging to that, sadly, and so I think, to me, one of the things that I was going to ask you with was, do you think that some of these pastors even contribute to some of that in and of themselves as well? I'm going to turn the corner a little bit on this and get your thoughts on that. And I'm going to bring up John Piper specifically, because he has his little section, Ask Pastor John. Do you think that goes beyond the norm of, this is a guy, he's a pastor, and he just kind of puts things out there, and if people want to read it, they can read it? Like, this is he's almost put himself in this position where it's like, I'm Pastor John and ask me anything pastorally that isn't necessarily guided and directed specifically at his individual congregation. He's no longer pastor at Bethel anymore, is he?
No, he retired 2 years ago.
That's what I thought. And so he's kind of put this out there, and I feel like with that kind of putting that label there, Pastor John, like you're almost, to me, dangerously inviting something that shouldn't be invited. Where my thought would be, instead of ask Pastor John this, go and ask your pastor these things. And he's put stuff out there that, has kind of blown up all over the internet. I think some of it's stupid. I think some of it, there's some legitimate things going on where it's like, I don't know that you necessarily should have kind of put yourself out there like that and have put this pastoral imprimatur on it of this is what I think and, almost go there and do likewise type thing. What are your thoughts on that, Zach?
Man, I disagree. I frequently listen to the Ask Pastor John podcast, and he frequently, maybe even always, refers people, go to your pastor. If there's anything about church issues, anything like that, he never says, this is how it ought to be, that's it. He always does tell people, this is something for the local church, for the pastor. And when you look at kind of the broader, you got to look at what somebody's motivation seems to be, and somebody who's written however many books and sold however many gajillion copies, and yet anything you want to encounter by him, you go on desiringgod.org and it's free. Every sermon he's ever preached, every book or article he's ever written, I'm pretty sure, I know they have curricula and stuff that you pay for, but I think all of John Piper's stuff is free. Mm-hmm. To me, there's always been pastors who have, you could even say, all right, so why is Bunyan, he's in Bedford prison, he's not actively pastoring a church. How come he's writing this book that's going to, have this pastoral effect on all these people? Well, there's always been people who have tried to share, what insight they have with the church at large. There'll always be parachurch. There'll always be traveling preachers and evangelists. And I almost see, when it's done well, and I think John Piper does it well, I almost see the kind of internet presence, podcasted, YouTube preacher kind of situation as the modern day circuit rider or modern day traveling evangelist. And now I can just travel everywhere at once, through the phone lines. Mm-hmm. When it's done poorly, it looks like the kind of circus is coming to town. Right. Finney, kind of, it's all about me and what I'm doing. And I do definitely think there are those out there who do that. And I see where you're coming from. I think he is pastor emeritus still at Bethel, and so the title of Pastor John is still, it applies, and no one's going to overturn that guy's ordination, so he's always going to be Reverend John Piper. But of all the guys out there who we could critique, I think John Piper's got to be the very, very bottom of the list as far as how he handles the humility of putting out content. Mm-hmm. And saying, just here it is for everybody. I have, used again and again articles or handouts and stuff from desiringgod.org, and all it says is make as many copies as you want, hand them out to as many people as you want, just don't remove this little copyright such and such, Desiring God. And in a world where every other day I'm smack up against, to use this I have to pay royalties. To do this VBS that we already bought again, we have to pay for it again. To do this play that we already bought, as a little cute dinner theater thing, we have to pay for it again. And then to have someone go, no, this all belongs to Jesus. Take and use and appreciate it. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. I think that, we've talked about some of these guys that are, there's a particularly ultra roided out guy who really positions himself in the very opposite end of the spectrum as he is the big deal. Mm. He should be consulted for what's going on in every church everywhere, because he has the answers. And come in and buy the kit and be like me and let your church be assimilated by my movement.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not. And that's the thing. I mean, I didn't even want to bring up a lot of these people in that same tone, because I know that, particularly with John Piper, there's a very different tone and level and intent with the things that he does. And so my question wasn't necessarily to pull at that other end of the spectrum, because I do think, I agree completely that there are a lot of people out there that are, trying to, exploit, and, they're trying to, make money. And, this is, good, bad, and different. They've put something out there. They want to get paid for it. And so, they've got their, latest books or whatever. I mean, I've got my own issues with Mr. Steroids. That's a little more personal, simply because I know people who are attached to that church. But my question was just more even with these more conservative pastors. And I'll be honest, I haven't listened to a lot of the Desiring God stuff. I haven't listened to a lot of, the Ask Pastor John stuff. I've more read the articles and things like that. And so my perception from reading the articles that come from a lot of these things, I'll be honest, I've never really seen that disclaimer on there of, you should really be going and talking to your pastor about it, that type of thing. This is more, from those articles that I've read, not necessarily from, the things that come from there. And I know that Piper has put that stuff out on Desiring God for free. I think part of my thought process is, being willing to be critical and, okay with that. Like, John Piper does have a lot of good stuff out there, and I think his resources are good. And I think people need to do the same thing they do with everything else, and they need to, kind of filter in and, filter out, the good and the bad. Like, John Piper is speaking from a personal experience. He's speaking from his view. I've heard Barnabas speak on this, many times on the Happy Rant. And I think this is very fair, and I think this is very accurate, that people hear, oh, John Piper does this, and I want to be like John Piper, and so I'm going to go do this. And so they try to imitate him. And for him, it's very natural. And it's his personality. And when they do it, it just comes off like crap.
Sure.
And I think that happens with a lot of pastors like this, though, is that they put these things out there, and people, instead of trying to live their own life according to the Bible and what the Bible says, they want to live their life according to what John Piper says about the Bible. And it comes off sounding, it comes off looking very, very poor, and horrible.
I agree.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't think that by presenting and providing content, he feeds into that. I don't know. I mean, I can see where you're coming from. Do you see a place at all in the Christian world for a parachurch organization where someone's going to, provide books and resources and things, but they're not your local pastor?
You mean like Desiring God, that type of thing?
Yeah. Or
yeah, I think we should have those resources. My pastor, Greg, and I'm sure you do this as well. Clearly, whenever you use resources, I can't even tell you how many times he's quoted John Piper over the years. I can't tell you how many times he's quoted Spurgeon, Grudem, Keller, and
he's never quoted me, though.
Actually, you know what? It's funny. I think he did once. I'm trying to remember. I think he did once quote you with something in a sermon. I'll have to dig a little further and see if I'm remembering correctly. But no, I think there is, and I think those things are there and available. I think the problem is sometimes there's, I think even pastors like that can sometimes overstep a boundary in some cases. And I'm thinking of something very specific, and I'm trying not to bring it up, and I think I should bring it up because if I don't, we might just continue to spiral down a rabbit trail. This might actually be
controversy.
Okay, here we go. So we actually talked about this on the podcast several years ago, and it was Kevin DeYoung's article, his plea to pastors.
Right.
About
it was a Sunday morning.
It was a Sunday morning Christmas, right?
I remember that like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Greg was so stridently against that.
Yeah. And so like that's that type of thing is kind of what I'm thinking of, where I think there's a level where at some point, I think there's helpful material out there, and I think these parachurch ministries and these pastors, and again, that's not even saying, I can't tell you how many times Greg's quoted Kevin DeYoung from behind the pulpit and has benefited from his ministry and from the things that he has said and done. But there was almost this feeling in this sense when that article was put out there that you need to listen to what I'm saying. And I've heard you and Ted talk about Kevin DeYoung a lot, especially, Ted co-writing the book with Kevin DeYoung. You guys have a deeper relationship with him than, Greg or I or anyone else might, more traditionally. And so like, that's kind of what I'm thinking of is there a point where even in these good intentions and wanting to get this information out there, that there's a boundary that can be crossed and stepped over?
Yeah. What's funny is I remember I read that article and I remember thinking, good on you, Kevin. Call it like it is. These people are just deciding not to have church. And then I listened to that episode and I was like, ooh. I realized really early on that your church had taken it very seriously, prayed about it. And I mean, we don't need to rehash this issue. I'm just using it as a case study like you were. And he had, it had been no controversy at your church. And then he had come across this article that wasn't just in Leadership Journal or somewhere presented to pastors to help them decide, or church leaders, but rather, it's mostly, I think, lay people who go on and argue on the Gospel Coalition. And so now all of a sudden there's this, well, wait a minute, why are you doing it this way? And the problem, I think, comes in when, everything sifts into the kind of theological, authoritarian, geologic column, and Kevin DeYoung, because he's a quote-unquote prominent or big shot or whatever, is higher in someone's mind than their own local church or, government, higher. And so, wait a minute, Pastor Greg, why aren't you, these orders have come down from on high. and that has happened a number of times. And I don't know how you get around that and still have, because I found that article as a pastor, as someone going, well, I know we're not going to have many people here. And we'd already dealt with it. I've been at this church long enough where it was not our first Sunday of Christmas.
Sure.
But, it's nice just to have someone else thinking through it the same way and kind of thinking, I'm on the right track. But how do you avoid then it becoming this parallel source of authority and teaching that's going to rival the pastor?
Right.
I had a prof in seminary. This was in the late 90s, early 80s. And so he wasn't talking about any of these guys. He would say, he'd show us some really complex element of New Testament Greek grammar, syntax, or whatever, and he'd say, you're going to do all this work. You're going to prepare this message. You're going to go and you're going to explain this. You're not going to talk down to them, but you're not going to talk over their heads. And on the way out, someone's going to say, well, that's not what Chucky says about this verse. And of course, he meant Chuck Swindoll,
right?
Because back when this guy's heyday. This prof's heyday, everybody who heard a celebrity pastor was either on the radio or, you're signed up for some major pastor's tapes to be snail mailed to your house.
Right.
And I think of that every once in a while because I will have someone – I'll even have – here's to take it one further, though, and show you that this is a problem that cannot be easily dealt with.
Yeah.
I will teach something. Someone will look down in that moment – into the commentary or footnote in their study Bible or worse, their devotional Bible of some kind,
right,
or life application Bible, and go, well, wait a minute, it says this in my Bible. And I'm going, okay, in most cases, what you're seeing there was written by a freelancer who does not even have a theological degree. But even if they do, let's talk about, I think I've made a case for what I'm saying to you, but let's talk about why they said that. And rather than, well, here's another authority, and why aren't you falling in line with this? That's going to be a danger as long as we have books, as long as we have commentaries, as long as we have any of this stuff. And I think the proliferation of audio and video through the internet, bringing famous pastors right into our homes or into our phones, it just shines a brighter light on that problem that's always been there, which is how do you avoid a de facto top-down hierarchy with a pope at the top,
right?
Whether the pope's name is considered to be Al Mohler or fill in your famous pastor crush, or Benedict, or whoever. Right. I don't acknowledge the new guy. So it's always been an issue. Yeah. I think it's to do with our frailty and our desire to put a face on God, which we've had from the beginning, and God has very, very sternly warned us against from the beginning. Right. Well, and this just makes it so much easier.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of more, what I was getting at is, I think you're right. One says Paul, one says Apollos. This has been going on, since the beginning. We're always looking for that one-upmanship. We're always looking to who we can stack behind. Before it was Paul and Apollos, it was Abraham and Moses. It was, pick whoever. There was always name stacking going on in the church, and it's still going on today. And I think for us as believers, the most important thing we can do is, if you are in a church that you believe the pastor is doing the job that God has called him to do, surrounding himself with elders, and they are, thinking through issues and they are working through issues. To me, I would say, I think right on. John Piper's put out tons of great information. I think you should go for it. R.C. Sproul, tons of great information. I think you should go for it. Tim Keller, oh my gosh. I've learned so much about apologetics from Tim Keller and the stuff that he puts out on apologetics. I think there's so much that we can gather from these people, but it's also to remember that, there is no stacking. There is no hierarchy when it comes to these things. And you should be, if you have these issues, it's great to kind of look around and think around. But if you're kind of fenced on an issue, and your pastor gives you a different perspective, and one that you're, that's kind of settled with you and it's settled with your conscience, you don't need to go and jump behind John Piper and say, well, but John Piper said it, so I'm going to do it. We talk about Halloween every year on this show, and my goal is never to have somebody violate their conscience when it comes to Halloween. If you just want to totally stay away from it, stay away from it, that's fine. But if you're kind of on the fence and you're like, you know what, I don't really know how I feel about it, might I persuade you to celebrate it in terms of going out and being a witness? When else throughout the year do you have the mission field literally coming to your front door? And so embrace that aspect of it. And I think whether it's Halloween, whether it's Christmas, whether it's, should you own a TV? And for me, the answer is always going to be yes. All of those issues, I think you need to seek God's counsel first and foremost. And if you're still coming up shy, you need to talk with somebody who you're in a relationship with. Because John Piper has a view on these things, but he doesn't know you, and he can't sit down and he can't counsel you in this thing because you don't know each other. And so I think that's kind of where I was thinking and going with this whole thing. I certainly don't want to put any of these people down. Again, they have done so much putting great information out there, making it available and free for people to get their hands on. And so I certainly don't want to be like, oh, don't listen to anything that John Piper has to say. I mean, the stuff that he has put out from Desiring God is just phenomenal. But I think that sometimes we tend to check our brains at the door when we hear these names instead of thinking through the issues on our own and saying, you know what? Yeah, I don't necessarily fully agree with that. Or, let me talk with my pastor about that and see where these things kind of fall into place and line up in my life. So.
Yeah. And also remember, you can make a infallible celebrity icon out of your own pastor.
Yeah.
And there's a danger there too.
Yeah.
But it's a lot harder because, you see your pastor get mad. You see your pastor screw up and tank a sermon. You see all that happen, and you're constantly reminded, this is a guy. One of my favorite shows is New Girl, and there was a line where my favorite character, Nick, says, I once saw a priest drop his keys and bend over to pick them up, and it was so human it just ruined religion for me. And if seeing your pastor be human is going to ruin the whole charade for you, it is a charade to begin with. We're all fallen, we're all sinners, we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. It's so much easier to airbrush over that, with good lighting and a little dab of makeup and wardrobe over here giving you all I'm not going to say his name, but a very prominent pastor was doing a series of videos for pastors, and there were just tips for being a good preacher and making a good presentation. And I think like episode 2 or 3 was he wears Spanx for men. And I thought, man, what a metaphor for all that's wrong with your particular ministry.
Yeah.
Kind of holding it all in and making it look like it's something it's not. That's easy to do from a distance. It's harder to do. It's just like in marriage, maybe here's something real crass, and and this is the last thing I have to say on the topic. Are you ready for it?
All right, let's hear it.
Your wife's heard you fart, right?
Oh yeah.
There it is. That's the metaphor. Spiritually, you got to be in a relationship with people. They know you're human. They know you. You know them.
Yeah.
And I have called up parishioners and said, you heard me lose my temper. I'm sorry, and had them say to me, I've never heard a pastor own up to something like that. Being human, and you're never going to, as long as it's someone you don't have any real personal relationship with. Right. And I think I'm beating a dead horse. So close it up and make us scarce here.
Yeah, man. No, this has been great, and I appreciate you following the rabbit trail with me on this one. I think it's been good, and I think there is an encouragement there for members. This is God's vehicle that He has chosen to bring the gospel to people, and we need to be on board with that. We need to remember that it's life, it's messy, but it's what He chose, knowing that all those things were going to be there. So Zach, this has been great. Thanks so much, man. We will catch you all later. We just rocked the Casbah.
These go to 11.